Gene Hackman's daughter demands answers. What the FBI found in his mansion is shocking. Gene Hackman's daughter has broken her silence with a chilling statement. What was found in my father's mansion will leave you in shock. But what exactly did investigators uncover? Gene Hackman, 95, and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, 65, along with a dog, were found deceased. From the moment authorities arrived, the case took unexpected turns, conflicting reports, missing evidence, and an FBI presence that raised more questions than answers. Security then checked on the residence and observed Mr. Hackman and Miss Arakawa on the ground, unresponsive. Something inside that house wasn't meant to be found, and now Elizabeth Hackman is demanding the truth. What did the FBI keep secret, and why does this case feel far from over? The discovery of a Hollywood legend's final days. Authorities were called to Gene Hackman's Santa Fe mansion on February 26, 2025, after a maintenance worker reported concerns about the property. The worker, who had been scheduled to perform routine servicing, knocked on the front door multiple times but received no response. After noticing a foul odor, he contacted local security, who then alerted law enforcement. Upon arrival, deputies entered the residence and quickly determined that Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, had been deceased for several days. Their bodies were discovered in separate areas of the home, Hackman near the foyer and Arakawa in a bathroom. The state of decomposition suggested they had passed away at least a week earlier, though authorities initially withheld a precise timeline pending further investigation. The scene itself raised immediate concerns. While there were no obvious signs of forced entry or a struggle, investigators took note of unusual details inside the home. Several items, including prescription medications, a heater, and a personal planner, were collected as potential evidence. 2 cell phones were also recovered, one of which had been completely wiped, while the other contained recent activity. The exact nature of the data on these devices has not been disclosed. Adding to the confusion, authorities initially reported that one of the couple's dogs had also been found dead near Arakawa's body. However, conflicting statements later emerged regarding the identity of the deceased pet. At first, it was claimed that Hackman's German Shepherd, Bear, had died at the scene. Days later, officials clarified that the dog found inside the home was actually an Australian Kelpie mix named Zenner, while Bear had been located unharmed at a local pet daycare. This misidentification raised further questions about the accuracy of early reports. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement officials ruled out carbon monoxide poisoning as a cause of death. Tests conducted at the property found no detectable gas leaks or hazardous fumes. Both individuals tested negative for carbon monoxide. Toxicology results were ordered, but as of the initial reports, authorities had not yet provided a definitive explanation for the couple's sudden passing. Hackman, who had retired from acting nearly 2 decades earlier, had lived a quiet and largely private life in Santa Fe. Despite his reclusive nature, those close to him had not reported any major health concerns leading up to his death. His daughter, Elizabeth Hackman, later commented that there had been no indication of anything wrong with her father in the months prior. She also expressed skepticism about the circumstances, questioning why certain details remained undisclosed. In response to growing speculation, the FBI became involved in the investigation, though their role was not immediately clarified. Officials confirmed that they were assisting local authorities but declined to provide specifics about their involvement. Neighbors reported seeing federal agents at the property for several hours, removing sealed containers before leaving the premises. Law enforcement officials continued to emphasize that there was no immediate evidence of foul play, but inconsistencies in early reports and the unexpected presence of federal agents fueled public curiosity. As more details emerged, the case only became more complex, leaving many unanswered questions about what had truly taken place inside the home. The cryptic evidence that raised more questions. In the days following the discovery of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's bodies, investigators began piecing together the final moments of their lives. While the initial assessment ruled out signs of forced entry or an immediate cause of death, certain details inside the home did not align with a straightforward explanation. The presence of prescription medications, inconsistencies in witness statements, and the unexpected involvement of the FBI raised more questions than answers. One of the most significant pieces of evidence was a personal planner found in Hackman's home office. Investigators noted that the entries appeared routine until a sudden gap in scheduled activities just days before his estimated time of death. His last noted appointment was scratched out with no indication of a rescheduled meeting. Close friends later stated that Hackman was known for keeping a strict routine, making the missing entries unusual. Authorities have not disclosed whether they found any annotations or details in the planner that might suggest a reason for the omission. Alongside the planner, 2 cell phones were collected from the home. One had been completely wiped, erasing all call logs, messages, and stored data. The other phone, which authorities believe belonged to Betsy Arakawa, contained outgoing messages and call records from the days leading up to their deaths. Investigators have not released the full details of these communications, but sources familiar with the case stated that the final call was made to an unidentified number. There has been no confirmation on whether the number was linked to anyone involved in the investigation. The presence of prescription medications near Arakawa's body also became a point of scrutiny. Among the items collected were blood pressure medication, thyroid supplements, and an open bottle of Tylenol. Some of the pills had been spilled onto the floor, though it is unclear whether this was intentional or accidental. Toxicology tests were ordered to determine whether medication played any role in the couple's deaths. Investigators also took note of a portable heater that had been left running in the bathroom where Arakawa was found. While initially dismissed as insignificant, further examination of the device revealed that it had been recently moved. Authorities have not stated whether the heater had any connection to the cause of death, but its unusual placement led to further analysis. As investigators worked through these inconsistencies, the involvement of the FBI remained unexplained. Federal agents arrived at the property within 48 hours of the initial police response, spending an entire day inside before leaving with multiple sealed containers. Law enforcement officials stated that the agency was assisting with the investigation but provided no further details on what they had collected. Reports later emerged that agents had taken specific interest in a section of Hackman's property, though officials declined to comment on why that area was examined. Elizabeth Hackman, the actor's daughter, became increasingly vocal about her doubts regarding the case. While she expressed deep grief over her father's passing, she also questioned why certain details were not being made public. She specifically raised concerns about the missing information in his planner and the erased phone records, stating that they didn't make sense. She also speculated that environmental factors, such as exposure to toxic fumes, may have contributed to his death. However, authorities reiterated that no hazardous gases had been detected during their initial assessment. Despite repeated inquiries, law enforcement and the FBI remained tight-lipped about the ongoing investigation. Without a clear cause of death, speculation continued to grow, fueled by inconsistencies in the evidence and the secrecy surrounding certain aspects of the case. Investigators maintained that the case remained open, but as days passed, it became increasingly unclear whether all findings would be made public. Before we reveal what the FBI found in Gene Hackman's mansion and what his daughter Elizabeth thinks about it, we must talk about something else first: the secret behind Hackman's reclusive years. For nearly 2 decades, Gene Hackman lived a quiet, private life in Santa Fe, New Mexico, after retiring from Hollywood. 2004, he withdrew almost entirely from public appearances, preferring the solitude of his expansive property. While some assumed he simply wanted to enjoy a peaceful retirement, those who knew him noticed subtle changes in his behavior over the years. Hackman had always been known for his disciplined routine. He maintained a strict fitness regimen well into his 90s, often seen cycling through the neighborhood or taking long walks on his property. However, locals also noticed that he gradually became less visible in the community. Once a familiar face in town, he started limiting his public outings, sometimes going months without being seen. Friends who visited described a man who was still sharp and engaged but seemed increasingly preoccupied with privacy. His home itself was another source of intrigue. Unlike many celebrity residences, Hackman's property had a number of unusual modifications that stood out. Contractors who had worked on renovations over the years described certain requests that didn't quite make sense for someone of his age. Reinforced security gates, a complex network of outdoor lighting, and a series of renovations that extended deep into the property's landscape were among the additions made in his final years. Some of these changes weren't merely cosmetic. Aerial footage of Hackman's estate revealed a series of outbuildings, some of which were partially concealed by trees and vegetation. Neighbors who lived nearby noted that certain sections of the land appeared to have been altered repeatedly, with digging and construction happening at odd intervals. Some recalled seeing trucks arriving late at night, unloading materials that were quickly covered up by tarps. There was never a clear explanation for what was being built. Hackman's relationship with visitors also seemed to shift. Those who had been welcomed into his home in the past noticed that he had become more selective about who he allowed inside. One acquaintance who had known Hackman for decades mentioned that he had once been invited into the house regularly but was eventually only allowed to visit outside. When asked about the change, Hackman reportedly brushed it off, saying he preferred to keep his home low traffic. Another unusual detail was the extent to which he maintained control over the property even in his later years. When most people his age would rely on hired staff, Hackman personally oversaw the security of his home. He rarely allowed anyone outside his immediate family to stay on the premises overnight and kept a meticulous record of who came and went. Some described him as protective, others as outright paranoid. Despite his reclusive nature, Hackman remained in contact with certain individuals from his Hollywood days. However, these conversations became increasingly brief, and he avoided discussing his personal life. When asked about his daily routine, he would give vague answers or change the subject. Some interpreted this as a desire to maintain his privacy, but others believed he was deliberately keeping certain aspects of his life hidden. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding Hackman's final years was the nature of his last major home renovation. Contractors working on the property reported that he had approved extensive underground modifications, work that took place over several months but was never publicly disclosed. When asked about the project, some workers refused to comment, citing non-disclosure agreements. Others mentioned that it was nothing out of the ordinary, but they gave no further details. Despite his advanced age, Hackman continued to handle certain aspects of his estate with extreme caution. Friends who spoke with him in the months before his death said he seemed concerned about something but never elaborated on what it was. One person who had a phone conversation with him weeks before his passing noted that he was more withdrawn than usual and spoke cryptically about unfinished business. These details raised more questions than answers. While some chalked up his behavior to an elderly man seeking privacy, others suspected that Hackman had been hiding something. The extent of the modifications to his property, combined with his increasing isolation, left many wondering what exactly had been going on behind closed doors in his final years. Gene Hackman's relationship with his daughter, Elizabeth, had always been complicated. While she admired his achievements as one of Hollywood's most respected actors, his demanding career often kept him away during her childhood. By the time he retired and stepped away from the public eye, the distance between them had already formed, and despite occasional efforts to reconnect, their relationship remained inconsistent in his later years. Unlike some children of celebrities who embraced the spotlight, Elizabeth largely avoided the public eye. She rarely spoke about her father in interviews, and when she did, her words were measured. Those close to the family noted that while she had deep respect for him, there were unresolved tensions, many of which stemmed from long periods of absence when she was growing up. She once described her father as a private man, even in his own family, an observation that became even more apparent as he aged. In the months leading up to his death, Elizabeth had not spoken to him frequently. While she maintained that there was no animosity between them, she admitted that they had gone months without direct communication. This revelation surprised some, given that Hackman was in his 90s and had slowed down considerably in recent years. However, according to Elizabeth, this was not unusual. "We weren't the type to talk every day," she reportedly told a close friend. He valued his space. Despite their infrequent conversations, Elizabeth was shaken by the news of his death. She expressed deep sorrow over losing both her father and stepmother, stating that while the world knew him as an acting legend, to her, he was simply Dad. Yet, as more details about the investigation surfaced, she found herself questioning certain aspects of what had happened. His death, his front door open, scattered pills on the bathroom countertop, one dog dead in the closet, two still alive on the property, raised concerns. One of her biggest concerns was the timeline surrounding his passing. Authorities estimated that Hackman and Arakawa had been deceased for at least 9 days before their bodies were discovered. This detail troubled Elizabeth, as she couldn't understand how no one had checked on them sooner. "It doesn't make sense," she reportedly told a close confidant. "He was always careful, always aware of his surroundings." Another point of confusion was the condition of his home. Reports indicated that some of his belongings were out of place. While investigators dismissed these as minor details, Elizabeth was not convinced. She found it strange that items like his reading glasses, which he always kept in the same spot, had been found in an unexpected location. Something wasn't right, she told those close to her. "It's like things were moved, but no one wants to say why." She was also unsettled by the fact that one of the phones found in the house had been erased. While it was unclear who had wiped the device or why, she couldn't help but wonder if it contained something that someone didn't want to be found. The fact that the FBI had been involved in the investigation only deepened her suspicions. If this was a natural death, why had federal agents been present? Why had they taken evidence without explanation? One of her more controversial statements came when she suggested that environmental factors may have played a role in her father's death. She speculated that toxic fumes or something undetectable could have contributed. Despite officials ruling out carbon monoxide poisoning, investigators insisted that all necessary tests had been conducted and that no dangerous gases were found. But Elizabeth remained unconvinced. As more time passed, she became increasingly vocal about her frustrations with the investigation. While she did not publicly accuse anyone of wrongdoing, she repeatedly emphasized that there were things that didn't add up. Those who knew her said she was not one to chase conspiracies, but in this case, she simply couldn't shake the feeling that some answers were being kept from her. Her concerns were amplified by the fact that certain areas of the property had been taped off during the investigation. While police claimed this was standard procedure, Elizabeth questioned why certain parts of the estate had been of such interest to investigators. She was particularly disturbed by reports that federal agents had focused on a specific section of the property, one that had not been part of any previous police statement. Though grieving, Elizabeth remained determined to learn more about the circumstances of her father's passing. The more she looked into the more details she uncovered, the more convinced she became that there was more to the story than what had been publicly disclosed. A shocking discovery, as the investigation into Hackman's death unfolded, one detail stood out above all others. Something had been found on his property that authorities refused to discuss. While law enforcement maintained that there was no immediate evidence of foul play, their actions suggested otherwise. The most striking moment came when crime scene tape appeared around a specific section of the estate, an area that had previously gone unnoticed. Neighbors and local reporters who had gathered near the property observed an unusual level of activity concentrated in one particular spot. Investigators had cordoned off what appeared to be a hole in the ground, and over the course of several hours, forensic teams and FBI agents were seen entering and exiting the taped-off area. Despite repeated questions from the media, authorities provided no explanation for what they had found. When Elizabeth Hackman was informed of this, her reaction was immediate disbelief. "What was found in my father's mansion will leave you in shock," she reportedly told a close confidant. At first, she had been struggling with the circumstances of his death. Now, she was grappling with the realization that something else had been discovered on the property, something authorities weren't willing to disclose. Leaks from sources familiar with the investigation hinted at a disturbing discovery beneath the property. A tunnel system had been uncovered, one that Hackman himself had never spoken about publicly. The tunnel, which extended beyond the immediate boundaries of the home, appeared to have been deliberately concealed. Authorities have not disclosed whether it was man-made or part of a natural formation, but reports suggested that its existence was not accidental. Inside the tunnel, investigators reportedly found scattered remains. While officials have refused to confirm or deny these claims, sources indicated that the remains were animal in nature, not human. The way they were positioned suggested something more than random animal activity, though no concrete evidence has been released to the public to substantiate such theories. Despite this chilling revelation, the FBI kept this secret. The agency refused to comment on its involvement, and no official documents or reports mentioned the tunnel's existence. But for Elizabeth, the unanswered questions only deepened her suspicions. He was loved and admired by millions around the world for his brilliant acting career, she said in one of her first official statements following his passing. But to us, he was always just Dad and Grandpa. I can't believe he's gone, and I don't understand why we still don't have all the answers. She also expressed disbelief over the idea that her father had simply passed away due to natural causes, citing his good health leading up to his death. There was no indication that anything was wrong. That's what makes this so hard to accept, she said. One of her most unsettling comments came when she speculated that something in the environment may have played a role. What if there was something in that house? What if there was something under it, she questioned privately to friends. Authorities had already ruled out carbon monoxide poisoning, but she remained unconvinced that all possible causes had been investigated. Despite mounting questions, the FBI remained silent on their findings. No official reports were released about what was inside the tunnel, and no law enforcement official was willing to publicly acknowledge its existence. To this day, there has been no formal explanation for why federal agents were involved, what was taken from the home, or why specific areas of the property were kept under heavy surveillance. Those who follow the case closely believe there is much more to the story than what was made public. Elizabeth has since stated that she will continue seeking answers, but she has little faith that she will ever know the full truth. There are things that don't add up, she said in her most recent statement. And I don't think we'll ever know what really happened. If authorities insist there was nothing suspicious, why did the FBI step in? And what are they still keeping from the public?